Welcome to the Music Reel. I'm your host, Nicola Burton. My guest moderator today is acclaimed music artist, producer, artist manager, and the CEO for Thumbs Up, Mr. Buzz Bidstrup. Hi, Buzz. And our very special guest today is Mr. Paul Davies, who is the Director of Musicians for the MEAA. Now, this is the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance. This is the largest and most established union and industry advocate for Australia's creative professionals. So, Paul and Buzz, welcome to the Music Reel.
Well, thank you.
Paul, let's start with you. Let's get right into this because musicians around the country are fired up right now. And obviously this is following that release of the $250 million arts package announced by the Minister for the Arts, Paul Fletcher. He's getting a spanking out there on social media and people are really angry. So let's talk about what this package actually means for arts and entertainment workers in Australia.
Well, thanks. It's hard to tell is the first thing I have to say. We know that the fundamental problem with facing most musicians is security of work. I mean, there's no work at the moment. And there are fundamental sort of structural problems in the way the industry is set up, which means even before we entered this crisis, most musicians were finding it difficult to make a livelihood, when there were certainly people who are in our membership, MEAA, who are, well, most of them are very accomplished musicians, and there's some of them earn a good living out of it, a lot of them through the orchestras, etc. But by and large, of course, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, musicians have to work multiple jobs. They often don't get paid, or they're enticed into doing gigs at low pay. They're enticed into perhaps thinking about trying to play for fees which really don't sustain them. So with that backdrop, the COVID crisis really ramped things up to a situation where, and I don't need to repeat this because I'm sure you know it, but I will. The fact that there are no gigs, no work, no money, no alternative work in many cases, because all industries have been affected, means that our members are in a very tough situation. The package, it's welcome. I mean, we can't say that there isn't. It isn't good that the government has recognised the need finally to invest. And having said that, we don't want to appear churlish, but it does. There are some questions that need to be asked about how effective this could be, so I mean, I'm happy to discuss those details, but that's sort of the background. And I mean, but one particular thing that's missing, of course, is further income support for musicians through JobKeeper, really. I mean, I think the real essence of the failure of government here, if I can say that, having said I don't want to be churlish, I'm now talking about the failure of government. One of the real issues is that if you consider that the essential requirement for job seeker payment is the satisfying the activity test to be looking for work, and there is no work in this sector, then what you're putting at risk by not providing more secure income support for those people is the future of the industry. Because why wouldn't somebody who is now on job seeker, who is told they have to look for work outside the industry, well, that's what they're going to do by necessity. And we're going to lose our talent, or let me put it a better way, the skill and the capacity that sustains this industry by design. I mean, that's something that is known. So government should know that that is what is at risk here. So the package does not go to that fundamental risk, which both affects individuals, but I think more importantly, perhaps, or just as importantly, affects the whole basis of the industry.
Good answer. Buzz, over to you.
Well, look, yeah, I just kind of add, yeah, they're great points. And the thing that's really missing is the gigging musician, the person who can't prove that they have a contract or, they play, I was saying to Nikki earlier, I've just lost every bit of my work from now until the rest of the year, and from January. So it's really, and there's no way to prove anything. I was a gigging musician. I didn't have any contract. And there's a lot of those in my boat, and I guess what started my questions to Nikki and I guess discussion with her, which might be relevant, is that I guess that voice to the powers that be. And shall I bring that up, Nikki? Can I talk about that now? Yeah. Look, I used to be a member of the Musicians Union, and I was from when I was a young kid in Adelaide, and I played in bands. And the Musicians Union had a scale rate, and we got paid the scale rate. And if people didn't pay us, they would follow them up, and all of that sort of stuff. And when we went and played on Countdown, if you weren't a member of the union, you weren't allowed to play on Countdown. It was as simple as that.
I remember.
Hey, you remember that?
I remember.
Yeah,
yes.
and the whole people, the whole crew the whole ABC would go out on strike if somebody turned up and wasn't a member. Now that kind of my membership in the union waned in the I guess the 80s when the actual industry changed as well, and then I just wondered did the Musicians Union get amalgamated with your mob?
No, well, good points, and I mean I lived through that period myself as a musician, and I was a member of the union, and I certainly know that situation. What happened is, as you say, I mean, we're going back a few decades, but there was a requirement through the formal...
Only three, Paul. Only 3 decades.
Well, it depends how. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it could be more.
It doesn't seem that long ago, does it?
No.
But when you look at some of the developments over that period, and really the consequences of those, as you say, we're now in a point where most gigging musicians have no effective clout. There's no voice and there's no reliability of fees. That's why we set up Musicians Australia in 2018. But to get to your point, your question, there was an arrangement in a legal requirement really in the 90s that said that unions needed to try and form amalgamations of economies of scale, and that's where the MEAA came from. Looking after, working with journalists and actors, performers of all sorts, and musicians and crew. So that's a kind of logical structure to what we do. And yes, we did. There were attempts at that time, and I think and after that time, for the Musicians Union to be brought into this alliance. They failed, and because it's a kind of voluntary process, you can't force people to work together, and that didn't happen. Having said that, the rules of the MEAA, I'm getting a bit technical now, but I'll try and get through this.
That's okay.
It's probably important to know. The rules of the MEAA have been certainly clarified. We always knew that they were broad enough to allow us to represent musicians at large, and that's certainly been clarified in recent years. But more practically, many musicians did make the decision to join MEAA regardless of the activities of the Musicians Union. So we've had a very strong basis and continue to have a very strong membership, particularly with symphony orchestra and musical theatre musicians who do, who are just extraordinary musicians who do very highly accomplished, world-class musicians, tour the world and play. I don't know what you're like. I'm a humble guitar player, and I see those people up there on stage doing what they do in those orchestras. It's humbling, really. Yeah.
It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. I'm a very simple self-taught drummer and a self-taught guitar player and keyboard player, and everything I've learnt about producing has been from experience. I'm constantly blown out with the amount of talent that there is, and the expertise and technical skill that you have to be that kind of musician. One of my dear friends is William Barton, who's a Didge player. You know, he plays. He's always somewhere. He used to be always somewhere. He'd ring me from Geneva and say, "I'm just going to breakfast. I'm with the symphony orchestra here. I'm in Boston." You know. But so these people are exceptional. I guess I'd love to ask a question about: did you get involved in the discussions, MEAA, in the discussions with the government about the response to the entertainment question? Did you get
the package? No, not so much. We there's. I mean, I think it was. You know, we have to work with all decision makers from whatever political background, and we certainly made approaches to the federal minister to advocate as is our responsibility on behalf of all the creative workforce. But we didn't get a seat at that table. We're making further, but it was a very intense period, right? From February, March on, when the kind of isolation happened. So we know that hasty, or perhaps better to put it, quick decisions needed to be made. But we hope and we trust that our input to these, particularly the implementation of this new package, will be recognised, because it'd be a bit, I think, disruptive, really, if some of these decisions are implemented without due consultation with the workers who make the whole industry function. So we are writing to the minister to say that we should be on the creative industry. What is it called? Creative Industries Task Force.
The task force.
But can I just want to say, on the issue of the Musicians Union, they still exist. We respect their role, but MEAA has a very active membership among musicians now, and it's growing really at a very pleasing rate, can I say? And that voice, I think, is now getting louder on behalf of musicians. So we've got a good base among symphony orchestra musicians, as I mentioned, but through Musicians Australia, which is the kind of brand we've used to represent musicians more broadly, freelance gigging musicians, those who, really are small businesses in most cases. That's really taking off. And I think, and just to get to the point about what are we looking for out of this package, our major claim at the moment, our primary claim, is that any money that comes from government to put on a gig has to come with a guaranteed fee for musicians. At the moment, as you know, there's no floor. It's morally unsustainable for that money to flow through to the industry and not to have a guaranteed amount going to the performers who will be putting on the show. That's not in the current arrangements. We think it needs to be written into it, and we're certainly making approaches to all music businesses to ensure that they sign up to that claim.
Well, Paul, I've got a question about data. It seems like there's about 40 peak bodies in the music industry, right? From what I can count. And then underneath that, there's probably 30 to 40 little unofficial groups where people get together. To me, there doesn't seem to be a central point of data collection, so that, my agency, we turned 30 on the 17th of July. So I can tell you the grosses, the number of artists, the number of tickets sold, and all of that. But no one's ever collected that from me. So I doubt that anyone from Q Music or any of the peak bodies understand my one little company's data. So imagine, and I feel like we're in this situation because there's no central point, to know. You can just push a button on a computer and go, well, look, this is actually how much we've actually lost. I mean, we scrambled to put I lost my gig online. But on March the 13th, I personally cancelled over $6 million worth of shows out of our system. That's just one little company, right? So imagine if there was a central pool of data that gave the government true indication of the losses, how there's a contribution to the economy in terms of the flow-on effect from gigs and what musicians are spending the economy. So I guess my question for you is, where do you get your data from? And like, what can we as a whole of industry do to actually create a better data pool so that we can actually get the decision makers to understand the real music industry? Because they're not going to understand what we do if they don't have access to the correct data, are they?
No, that's right. Well, of course, that's a trademark, or one of the things you always hear from government. They have to have evidence-based policy, and the data, of course, is a key component of that evidence. I think, from our point of view, we rely on our members, and we've got a good reach now through social media and through our membership in terms of that allows us to gather data. But as you say, that's only one part of it.
Yeah.
I think we did put in a claim submission last year or the year before to one of the inquiries that said it would be good to have a census of the music industry or music workforce.
Yes.
Regularized. And of course, that's a big deal just to get that up and running. It take a bit of investment. It probably wouldn't be hugely difficult to do once you set it up. And I think we got a good hearing with that idea. But failing that, I think simple collaboration. I mean, I know the work you did was great. That was incredibly visible, what you did at the beginning of this crisis. So maybe people are ready to take hope from that and make a more sustained contribution to sharing data. There are some constraints we have because we're a membership organisation,
right.
but there are privacy concerns, but that doesn't stop us sharing information, and of course it's important to do so where we can make gains.
All right, so I guess the next question, well, Buzz, I'll let you go first.
I just had a very quick thing to add to that, was the fact that in the census, you pointed out to me, Nikki, that a lot of people are asked, what is your job? And, they might say, well, I work in a shop, or I'm a whatever their job is. Oh, I'm also a musician. They don't say they're a musician. They're a short order cook or something like that. Yeah. So there's a lot of people that are just flick through, fall through the cracks all the time. So you don't really know how many people there are out there that could be affected. And I mean, I just look at the numbers, and I'm a bit of a statistician and a former mechanical engineer. So I kind of look at stats and figures and stuff, and look at, you go, if you just knew how many people had lost their gig straight away, then you could have, like they did in New Zealand. A friend of mine in New Zealand got given $2,000 straight away by the government. They just went, here's $2,000. You're a musician, you haven't got any work. And it would have been so easy because there was such a big gap in the job keeper seeker thing. Was it $30 billion, $60 billion or something? It would have been so easy to do. Anyway, sorry, Nikki, I didn't want to jump in.
No, that was actually a good point, because Paul, I'm not sure if you're aware, the Queensland Conservatorium Research Centre released a report last week called Making Music Work. I don't know if you heard about that report.
I think I have seen it. Yeah. There's so much that comes through my email, but I haven't kept up with everything. But yes.
But it was 3 to 4 years research, and they discovered, as Buzz said, that when artists were doing the census, that there was no ability for them to note down that they did a gig. It was the gig economy. They had part-time work, plus they were musicians. And I think that we need to really strip back our very basic, government connections with us, like census, to be able to trap specific data that actually really talks about what's really going on. So that, if you can have a look at that report, it's fascinating to understand the plight. But I guess my question for you, Paul, is, so we've got the MEAA. if a musician is like, they write original song, they do releases, they might tour a couple of times a year, but they fund their, I guess, their original project based on doing covers, would there be benefits for them to join the MEAA?
Well, of course, I mean, what we say is that there's no other way of fundamentally of restoring a floor of fees and basic conditions in this sector without initially having enough people demanding it. Now, it sounds kind of glib to put it that way, but in fact, it's only glib because it's true.
Mm.
You know, there's no regulatory system we can call on to come in and save us in this sector if you're a musician, which is why our basic claim is demand to be paid, demand fees for your gig, and don't undercut. Now, we've added to that demand a safe workplace, you know, safe gigs as well. But they go together, and all that adds up to our plan to establish an industry code of conduct for live performance. So whether you play covers or original music, whether you're a freelancer, a side person, session player, or indeed a musical theatre player who has a more regular sort of employment arrangement, it's necessary for us to speak with one voice about these fundamentals. We can talk about other changes later, but at the moment, there's no floor to this sector. So it is the race to the bottom, that figurative race to the bottom where a quarter of gigs aren't being paid at all.
Yeah.
And when you look at we looked at, of course, everyone knows how bad streaming and recording has become. And we can't rely on that sector anymore. So any headway has to be done first through live performance. Sorry, Buzz.
No. Look, I was going to just jump in about that live performance. Live Performance Australia have been pretty full on in these discussions and stuff. And a lot of that money that's talked about, let's have a new festival, and it's like the festivals are sort of owned by international international corporations. They have money involved in that, and also the bigger productions. They have it's just such a it's annoying to think that it's people like us get missed out. It's just annoying.
Right. Yeah. Look, we've had a good reception from LPA and others, but we're the kind of new kid on the block in a way. There hasn't been an effective music union, with all due respect, for a while. And we only launched in 2018. But through MEAA, we've got traditional industry links there. We do have constructive relationships with LPA, with APRA, AMCOS, with the music associations in each state. But they're developing, right? It's something we need to work on. Yeah.
So to all of the artists out there that have been offered $30 an hour plus a $100 meal voucher and a $100 drink voucher. Now, this is what's being offered to cover artists in Queensland right now.
Right.
What do you say to those artists?
Well, I'd say work out what your true costs are and work out what it means to actually earn a living from your craft, from your art form, and don't undersell yourself. But through Musicians Australia, we've also developed a gig map, which when people get back to playing gigs, will become a much more powerful tool for us to assess the market. It's a live market survey. We are not foolish enough, I think, or not naive enough, maybe better word to use, to think that we can come in and just set an arbitrary minimum fee for performance. We know it's tough for many producers and venues. We know there are different business models. And because things have been so unorganised for such a long time, we can't just come in and impose some minimum fee and expect it to fix the industry overnight. So our plan is to assess the market, who pays what, where and under what terms, and through the aggregation of that data, we'll be able to develop a much clearer notion of or idea about what's going on, where to focus our attention, what business models are sustainable for musicians, which ones aren't. So join with Musicians Australia, I have to say that, because it's through our collective activities that we'll be able to really assess what will sustain the live performance industry, particularly for musicians as well as for businesses, right? We need to get that balance right. But at the moment, I think the balance is certainly not right. I would say to those musicians who are getting paid something that isn't fair, do your homework, don't undercut each other, talk to us.
So it's a good call to action, isn't it, Buzz? What's your thought?
It is my thought is that there will be a lot of people who are in the position of having, shall I say, being part-time musicians who would gratefully accept $30 an hour because it's more than you get at McDonald's, and a free meal voucher because they probably can't afford to buy food. So, there is going to be an element who are going to take that. And I agree with Paul. You should definitely know your value and stand your ground, but it's very hard to stand your ground when you've got nothing and $30 an hour, and you're going to play for 4 hours, $120, and you're not getting any JobKeeper, job seeker. There's going to be a lot of people that will do it, and then the pubs will just kind of take it anyway because. That used to happen. I don't know what area you were in, Paul. Like, were you in contemporary music as such?
Yeah. I was contemporary music.
Yeah, cool. So there's always that case. When I joined the Angels, I got to tell you, in 1976, I joined the Angels as a drummer, and I was making $5 a day. That's it, $5 a day. And when I finally later on in 1980, when I finally got to tour America with the Angels, or called Angel City, unfortunately, I was making $20 a day. That was 5 years later, and really, it's just ridiculous. The only thing that sustained us was the fact that when you sold a record, you would make 5% of 90% of the recommended retail price. Came down to about 20 cents, which got divided up amongst the band. But if you sold 800,000 records, then you actually made a little bit of money. But that's my point, that there will be so many people that will take that money.
Yeah, we're not. We don't think it's something that we can solve overnight.
No.
But we do think that there are some niches there that we can build out from. There are music businesses, pubs or other venues that pride themselves on providing a stage, a platform for good music that will pay a fee that's worthy of the musicians. Well, let's work out from that. Once people start realising that you need to make a choice. If you're going to pay a fee, then you'll need to make sure that what you're paying for is something that's worth seeing, worth hearing. Then we'll lift the floor a little bit. No one wants to. We don't want to speak ill of hobbyists or those who come in. Everyone's welcome to, and everyone needs to experience and be able to do their own music. But we, on the other hand, we want to be able to establish fair standards for those musicians who invest their time, passion, energy in this sector, and who all too often are discouraged, who leave, and that's a waste. And it's a waste for them. It's a waste for our culture at large, and it's something that can be avoided. We need to build a vibrant industry that can sustain all of us. And I don't think it's impossible. I think it's within our reach to do it. People want to do it, and we've got a plan that I think will make headway.
What a great conversation. It's so great for artists to actually listen to you talk today, Paul, and also Buzz, for you to share your history. because we're at this point in history where this crisis could be an opportunity to maybe make some changes in this industry. And I think that, you know, what you're saying today, actually what you're both saying, it's a bit of a call to action. If we actually want to make some changes, no one's coming to save us. We've got to do it ourselves. And
Absolutely.
maybe the first step is to join someone like the MEAA and then start thinking about putting processes in place to get that central data collection point. So we have a value. And what you're both saying is, what is the value of your music? What is the value of your show offer? That's probably the first place to start. So,
Indeed.
yeah, great conversation. And so I'll leave it there, guys. Buzz, thank you for joining us today. And Paul, what a pleasure to meet you and hear all about what you're doing. It's been great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
It'd be great to continue the conversation.
we will continue this conversation. Thanks, everyone. Peace out.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.